Ready to go. So good afternoon to everyone and welcome to Marco's proposal defense. We're really excited to see so many attendees in support of Marco. It's really wonderful to have you all here. I am Dr. Amy Horner. I'm the academic director of the program here at Bauer. And I am going to give you all a quick run of show. So Marco will be speaking for about 30 minutes. He'll be presenting his proposal with the help of his slide deck, which hopefully everybody can already see on the screen. Once Marco has finished his presentation, his committee will ask a few questions, make sure that they give him feedback and any other advice they have for him as he moves through the research process. And once the committee's questions have been satisfied, we will open the floor to questions from any of our other attendees. You're more than welcome to ask questions of Marco. And once that is finished, we'll send Marco and everyone other than committee into a breakout room so that the committee has time to deliberate and develop their feedback as well as the outcome of today's proposal defense. And then we'll bring just Marco back into the room with the committee so that he can hear the results of his presentation today. So without any further instruction from me, I'll turn this over to Dr. Meng Lee. Dr. Lee is Marco's dissertation chair, and he's going to get us kicked off. Dr. Lee.
Okay, thank you. It's quite excited to have this moment. Marco has been working with me how long? 2 years, right? Almost. And Marco has done excellent job on this maritime industry, and he started to have interest about how AI will impact the industry. So we have this excellent opportunity to listen to Marco and to see what's the progress. I'm quite excited. So Marco, I believe this is your showtime.
Great. No, thank you so much for all of your support, Dr. Lee, and to the committee, Dr. Jove Howe and Antonio Gargano here for this whole long process, and Dr. Horner and Dr. Patrick and all the cohorts that are joining today as well for this defense of my research proposal. And also, I've invited some industry leaders. And thank you for recording this. There's a lot of people that can't make it today that want to see that. I've tempted to invite my mother, but she's Brazilian and I'm afraid of her cheerleading. I'll lose my academic composure if I have her on. I think just to backtrack a little bit and give you preface to the presentation here, I was quite excited throughout the course on the AI development. It's something that we all know is happening, but the DBA course has brought it to life of what is happening intensely, starting with Dr. Aviaron talking about the impact in the healthcare and the impact in the finance industry. And then bringing that in and pounding exactly brought it to the world I live in global transportation, but specifically my heart is in maritime in many ways, in chartering heavy lift ships and the challenges in that. And so I got quite excited in the literature review looking at how will AI impact the maritime industry. Just to give you context before I go into a tremendous amount of detail to defend this proposal, what was quite interesting was where AI is being adopted in the maritime space already. SpaceX has two 400-foot barges, McDonough barges, people in our industry very familiar with those type of barges, are recovering SpaceX rockets out in the US Gulf. And that's all automated. And Norway has got the Yara Birkeland fully automated without a single crew on board, and it's basically remote with remote operations going between ports. And the Norwegians I talk to say, well, we have a population of 5 million, a tremendous coast. We can't compete with countries such as China and even the US that have a tremendous labor pool for the maritime industry. But the reality then sank in that we don't have the commercial world in. And when we talk to industry owners, vessel owners, adoption of AI is something very skeptical, and whether or not it will happen. But so in that, just to give you context of what I'm talking about, this is a heavy lift crane on a vessel. And it is one of these incredible pieces of technology. I'll spare you the history. I've also invited some colleagues from the University of Houston Cullen Engineering, where I teach project logistics, capital project logistics, that are on there, very familiar with this technology, moving these large components for refineries, power generation, transformers, all these sort of industrial challenges. From a safety point of view, to have digital technology on these ships is miraculous. To have that the operator has got some tools that measures the wind, the weather effects, and maybe when he's not having such a good day, makes him a better crane operator on the ship. But what was interesting, as we find in the world I live in, and since on my day job, I'm often going to the port for loadings and discharging and observing what is happening there. It struck that occasionally it happens that these cranes fail, and they fail in areas where there's not the possibility to repair it so quickly as on land. And the more I dig deeper into this question of why it's happening, and also from a purchasing point of view, it seems like when you vet a ship, the information on the type of crane on board the ship is not something that is readily available or known when you're contracting the ship. You really have to pierce down to understand what is the model, how old, where was it made. It's not something that's readily available before you contract that ship. And there's a tremendous gap I find in the commercial world about that crane type and what the people in the office are living and the crew on board are living with decisions being made, including the digital technology that is made on there. Why is that important? So this here, what the research focus is, I'd like to investigate the digital AI crane systems adoption and their impact on CO2 emissions. When that ship, vessel idling is well documented in the industry, say for container carriers, and on that, the vessel idling is an impact on CO2 because the vessel engine, even if it's only operating on an auxiliary engine, is still emitting CO2 emissions. But in this case, it is much more a proxy variable, and you'll see this in sort of the flow chart. It's evidence here that this is happening, or maybe not, as the research will find out. So I am trying to find out, do technical support, what can you do? What can the people purchasing the ship, for example, what can policy support do to make sure that that crane is not failing, or that we are avoiding vessel idling and avoiding ultimately CO2 emissions from an impact on this research? So this is the boxes and arrows, great class by Dr. Grimes on making sure that we had this outline. The vessel crane failure causing vessel idling and user frustration and CO2 emissions, and the moderation by digital technicians and facilitating conditions. Are we going to a port where this can be actually recovered? I have seen this recently, for example, in the discharge of a vessel in Guyana, where the president of Guyana was waiting for the arrival of this, and we lost 3 days waiting for this ship to operate, for a technician to come in from Miami. And of course, CO2 emissions and auxiliary engine, and a lot of people scrambling. This research, I hope, will pierce a corporate, you call it a corporate veil. I'm not going to call it a corporate veil. I'll call it a corporation veil. This information is not readily available here in terms of the crane type. So how can we find out as a researcher? And this is here thanks to the committee in a number of individuals. I also had the fortune of submitting this as an abstract to the International Association of Maritime Economists, They accepted this abstract, and I gave a presentation in June in Norway at the Norwegian School of Economics. It was very well received and something that is overlooked in the industry. So the contribution to theory is really here, the maritime industry, to me, exemplifies what's known as the Moravec's paradox, where machines are able to process and make decisions, but the humans are still superior when it comes to skill sets, and also combining and using intuitive judgment. And that's a core skill requirement on the ship. And to give you context, the more I research into this, the more I find opportunities to generalize. John Deere, and there's some literature on this. I've never met a farmer who isn't proud that he is as self-sufficient as he can be on his own farm, whether it's his own lettuce, his own eggs, but it's also his ability to repair his own tractor. And so the American Farmers Association is actually gotten together and suing John Deere to have the rights, to have the software to be able to repair their tractors. I give you this something maybe we can all relate to. That same pride exists on the crew. And I have witnessed that they don't have the skill set anymore to repair that digital technology. The US military, for example, is now insisting on what's called a right to repair clause, that our troops are able to repair every equipment that they purchase for a military readiness. And that gives you context of what we're researching here, specifically on the heavy lift ships that are lifting heavy cargo around the world and relying for loading and discharging. So the theoretical foundation here of this research is UTAUT, the Unified Theory of Acceptance and Use of Technology. And this is sort of a boilerplate of business school theory and application, if you're not familiar. And I'm very grateful that Dr. Lee has suggested Dr. Jove Howe, who is one of the Bauer experts in UTAUT. I really enjoyed her challenging me on my constructs and what I'm measuring, and aspiration here to bring this research to life. What I have here is sort of the core constructs is performance expectancy. And these are theories here, and maybe to bring it into context, will this improve my job performance? How easy is this to use? Effort expectancy, social influence. Do others think I should use this? And facilitating conditions. Do I have support to use this? This theory, in a lot of the research I found, applies to maybe consumer digital, for example, healthcare applications for nurses. I found immense literature related to that type. What I found very, very limited research was on the physical digital aspect. And so what I am hoping to bring this UTAUT extension, and this was actually very well received in Norway at the conference, is this model to begin with. And from a professional point of view, I felt obliged to bring in European, and I think they may be some actually participating here today, some European advisors through the encouragement of Dr. Lee and Dr. Patrick, to get some European, because of the status of maritime economics in Europe being so much more developed maybe than in the United States. And that dialogue I had in Norway was honored that they accepted the abstract, but even more dialogue and more advisors that I was able to shape this research proposal on this. And this was quite exciting, the confirmation that yes, UTAUT is very interesting, and this physical digital is something that perhaps has been overlooked. And I have a goal that maybe this can be an extension of that theory. So what is, as I described here, the Moravec paradox, to bring it again, Moravec's paradox, we know, say, Chewbacca versus C-3PO on the Millennium Falcon for the Star Wars fans. The Millennium Falcon, by the way, was a cargo ship. And Han Solo was dependent on Chewbacca to kind of troubleshoot, and on C-3PO's planning and R2-D2. So this here brings it home on what we're talking about in terms of that troubleshooting that happens on the ship. And if you've been on the ship, you know that the crew needs redundancy, needs to be keeping keeping that operations going. The Polanyi paradox. In Norway, I got the chance to see the incredible Viking Museum, a 1,000-year history of how the Vikings were building ships, passing on without a single construction drawing. They were passing tacit knowledge on down the line here. And it's these two important paradoxes that perhaps I may, in completion of this search, be able to get an extension of UTAUT of having overlooked and contribute to this theory. So there's a number of practical contributions for this, is that perhaps purchasers of this technology will be able to assess the digital technician requirements. Maybe there'll be guidelines for balancing digital system complexity with maintenance and training recommendations on the crew. Many in our industry know that there's a tremendous gap between tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 carriers that will have trained crew. There's one carrier that is very proud that every crew member is able to operate the crane, and derived from that have some troubleshooting capability of the cranes and to know that they're operating. On other ships, you know that the crew are basically able-bodied seamen that are basically another hand on deck to be able to support that. Environmental impact. I would argue that even if we find minimal impact here because of this delay, this is preventable. And we may discover other reasons why this delay is happening from vessel idling. So the methodology is a mixed parallel method. Maritime analytics, there are some tremendous software. Clarkson that has the crane types on the ships. And I've started to do some pilot research on that. And Eskian is a well-known software that tracks vessel idling and tracking as well the CO2 emissions because of that vessel idling. So I've done some preliminary analysis of that and discovered that, yes, there is an association on the heavier the cranes are on there, but it doesn't tell us why the vessel is idling. It could be many other factors, as anyone in the industry might know. It might be poor drawings from the shipper. It could be port congestion. There could be other reasons on that. So the way to get it through guidance of the committee, the way to get that is survey data. And with survey data, I've had the industry support of conferences like the Breakbulk, who coming up, Breakbulk Americas, coming up September 30th. I have some volunteer students that will have an iPad with the Qualtrics questionnaire out there. Heavy Lift Magazine will be distributing each of these to about 20,000 participants online here. The Journal of Commerce, these are all, and then of course I have some vessel operators, insurance surveyors, and freight forwarders. These are all target in the distribution here to be able to get a response to the survey, which I spent quite a bit of the summer trying to perfect, and it's still, I think I'm finally there to the point. Operational data, I'm hoping to get some statement of facts as well, and some of the questions will have free text that I can also do a qualitative review. So this is an example of the data here of looking at the CO2 from the different crane types that I was able to analyze, looking at the CO2 emissions from Eskian and Clarkson, taking those two data sets and finding clear evidence that there's a link here of an impact of vessel idling with cranes on board ships. So the target population, as I described here, are basically maritime professionals that are, and ideally, we've crafted the questions so that I get as close to those individuals that are actually on board the ship and living it. Either people that are going on ships, contracting them, the crew through a union is one distribution source, and various surveyors and participants that are freight forwarders that are going out there and witnessing what is happening on that. And the validation, as I said, will come through secondary data, statement of facts. That's very commercial. And I just want to emphasize throughout this research, it is very hard to get this data given the commercial sensitivities. I've tried to find if this is happening on land, And it is, maybe the redundancy is a little easier on land, but it's swept under the rug. It is not something people talk about. And it's a survey and this design is able. I'm confident this will get out quite a bit of interesting information. And then with the free text in the survey, we'll give an opportunity for some qualitative analysis through actual coding. And here's some possible variables in construction. Ultimately, we can get an operational readiness index and looking at when we see factors that are not the digital issue. And these are just a sampling of some of the questions here. I could dwell probably another hour to discuss just at survey mapping here. That was quite intense through the support of my committee and outside to get the questions as good as they can collect. Dr. Blair, for example, was fantastic as well in giving his time. And so these are sort of how I've devised the questions so that we collect the data. Here's a sample of the survey mapping. Because the UTAUT is a latent variable, I'm looking for to measure the indicators on this. And then we've got also as well some continuous variables such as the CO2 emissions. So that's all considered here on how I've set up the survey map for regression. And just to summarize the 5 key dimensions being measured, the vessel profile, the vessel type, I'm trying to control for that and having a very specific dead weight type. The crane reliability, capturing the failure frequency, delay incidents, common failure modes, and then digital AI systems, whether it's even digital or mechanical, because that's a key factor. But a trend we see is that many vessel owners are putting digital technology on these cranes. Someone is being sold that this is effective, and it may not always be the case. Adoption attitudes on UTAUT. So this is the constructs here that will be measured. And of course, how are these moderated by technical support and opportunities for redundancy? Data validation strategy. We've got the open coding and the actual coding from the qualitative texting beyond the statement of facts here, which would be a dream to get, which is basically a contract between the shipper and the vessel. But that, again, is very, very difficult to get and anyone to disclose. Not for my research, but the more I dig in, this is probably another dissertation in itself, is to come up with an operational readiness index that we're able to measure. Is the crane ready? The reputation of the equipment, the survey implementation. And this is sort of going back to the title and why in the literature review and the introduction, the autonomous vessel. I think this level of detail here is laying the groundwork for that. Maybe someday AI will be able to operate the ship. I don't see it, honestly, in our lifetime on what we have to do it here on that. But there are small steps, a slow burn here of what needs to be done. And I go into some detail here about the regression on that. Perhaps I can leave that to some of the questions for those that might be interested for any detail on that. My timeline with this proposal, which I hope will be accepted, I will issue the Qualtrics out to Breakbulk to send it off on social media, and the target is for September 30th at Breakbulk Americas to send the students out and collect questions, and then various other distribution channels, and keep this open until January as we collect the questions there. So in summary, I'm quite excited about the impact that this study can have in our industry, not only looking at CO2 emissions, looking at user frustration on the ships, and maybe helping the crew out that are every day taking a lot of risks out there. That is only known for people that come close to the ship and make the people in the office make perhaps better decisions ultimately from a purchasing point of view, and perhaps also look at some policy implications on autonomous vessels The Europeans, by the way, are leading the way in many ways. The International Maritime Organization has a clear code about autonomous vessels, and guidelines on that. Very little of this. I got some professors very excited in Europe that they had looked at this specific aspect of crane technology on heavy lift ships, specifically from some universities in Europe that I met there in Norway and have had dialogue since. So thank you again. That's a summary of it. I can probably talk on for more, but it might be a good time for questions.
Thank you, Marco. And I know you're passionate about this topic, so I'm sure you could talk to us for the rest of the day. But it is time now for some questions from your committee.
So, any questions for Marco?
Marco, I have a question. So, how confident you are that you can capture these CO2 emissions precisely? Because to me, that's one of the most challenging. And this is my only question because I've talked to Marco quite a lot and we have exchanged emails. So I have to be really honest. I really admire Marco's dedication. I think even of all the PhD students I've kind of interacted with, I think he is like the most dedicated person I've seen. So this is my only question, simply because I've already gone through a lot through all the material and Marco, I'm a honest person. I don't typically give this sort of compliments to everybody, but I have to be honest, I've never seen anyone so dedicated and so passionate about the thesis. So yeah, I really
No, thank you, Antonio, and you've been so helpful in challenging, and all the professors have been very helpful in challenging me to ask better questions in the survey. I'm very confident because there's different ways, and I've learned from you that there's different ways of asking the same question in making the survey more effective. And in this Eskian, the slide I put up, the service that I can tell you using my UTC COO, we use this service looking at vessel idling. We have to report it for certain clients. So this is an existing service that basically tracks vessel idling when the ship is sitting. And the survey questions are crafted so that we can ask how much delay did that cause for you? And to be honest, the reality is in the commercial world, there's a lot of people that just don't care about CO2 emissions, right? We know we care as good citizens, we care as good corporate citizens, and as well about what is happening with CO2 emissions. But the impact that they see is on a waiting truck, on a waiting crane, on not being able to offload the crane. So there's other ways of capturing that waiting time, which is also swept under the rug in the contracts with the ship. It doesn't come out. But the way the questions have been devised, I'm confident we will capture that vessel idling time when that ship is sitting, because it is frustrating for everybody. Nobody wins when that ship is sitting because of this issue. So in short, I'm confident we will get it, but it's not by asking somebody, hey, CO2 emissions, how many with that? We've had to design and redesign the question so that we're capturing the waiting time and the vessel idling time.
Thank you.
Okay, I will follow up with a more sort of a comment or a suggestion for Marco. I think Marco did an excellent job. When I see the presentation at the very beginning, I was a little worried about because UTAUT is a model that has been extensively used in the literature. So what makes the good side is it has a very clear framework that we can leverage on for the research paper, so you can guarantee the quality of the work is at least at a certain standard. So that's the good part. But the downside is because it has been used so often, what is the novelty or uniqueness of the new research, right? So we talked about this. So how can we extend it or add some new elements to it? Based on the presentation today, I saw Marco has done put effort in thinking about this intellectual novelty to add to it, especially by introducing the two paradoxes. I think that's very, very eye-opening. I haven't seen this. So I'm very, very proud of you of taking time to look at this and adding certainly new stuff. So I'm very happy about this. And so good job. The only comment or still certain worriness is because of that context is very special. And when you really run the survey study, there is a certain requirement for who is eligible to be the participants. Because without those knowledge, right, that industrial experience certain things, uh, their responses to the survey is questionable to some extent. So my worriness is what's your plan to make sure that you can get eligible participants that also meet the sample size requirement? Uh, I know you have network, you have done, very much rooted in the sector, but as in real world implementation of a research, is there some plan or backup plan if there's any issue coming up? Just
No,
my
thank you for
comment.
that. Yes, I've actually spent this entire summer thinking about that question and been challenged by yourself and Dr. Lee and Dr. Gargano and Dr. Blair on the same point. Um, the industry, I say on the good news, is that the distribution, for what I understand from to get into a tier one journal, is that you need to have 300 quality surveys to be an extension, and that's my personal goal. That's not necessarily for the dissertation, but of course I strive for the tier one standard here for the journals. I confident that I will get between 100 to 150 quality responses and have on that. And how is that? Number one, Breakbulk is willing to distribute this to 20,000 participants. Heavy Lift Magazine has something like 24,000 participants on their email distribution. Breakbulk Americas has 5,000 in person. And there are various individuals, whether they're a trucking company that is going to the port, port captains, they're all participating and witnessing that. Part of the survey question, through all of your good guidance, is to qualify the respondent. And some of the questions are designed as well to cross-check the quality of the responses. So a lot of that work in the past 4 months has been going into the survey mapping and the survey design to exactly what you're asking to make sure that the questions are really getting at the truth and to be able to clean that data and not just have somebody who's just answering to get away from a nice student at the conference. So that's the goal. And I have to say that I'm very grateful that in June the Journal of Commerce, which is perhaps the most prestigious trade publication, they have a very serious editorial board, and they're not just doing marketing kind of corporate media type. They actually published an article on my research, and that got incredible attention. Some of the LinkedIn, when I saw the response on LinkedIn and the comments of their posting, inspired me to relook the survey mapping. I hadn't really looked at some of the free text questions. So in short, the answer is that the free text questions will be also a backup plan, as you call it, for actual coding. Because some of those questions the comments that came on LinkedIn, I could quickly code with actual coding and also understand some of the quantitative data.
That's great.
Any other questions? Okay, I think that's great. I do have a question, Marco. Since we have been working for a while, I have known your research, but I do have a personal question. How do you balance your work with your I know you have a company, you have DBA, you also have a lot of outside activities. How do you balance all those things?
Oh, it's just having a family, number one, that understands, and I guess we're all type A in our family makes it a little easy. No, I think that's the story. It's not work, right? This is all fun. So,
Okay.
and that's the same with the work we do. The colleagues I have at work, they're all it's just tremendous work, right? It's not work anymore.
Great. I think that's a great attitude. Marco, it's always positive. I really appreciate that attitude when we work, when we discuss. So if there is no any more question, what the next of us?